Am I the only one that didn't know these weird hygiene facts from the Victorian era? Welcome to FactFolio, where we delve into the past, unearthing the captivating, the peculiar, and everything in between. Today we're strapping on our metaphorical time-traveling corsets and venturing into the fascinating world of the Victorian era, a time of immense social change, industrial revolution, and, you guessed it, some pretty interesting hygiene practices. Now, when we think of the Victorian era, images of elegant ladies and gentlemen in opulent settings often come to mind. But beneath the veneer of sophistication lay a reality that might surprise you. While the Victorians made significant strides in science and medicine, their approach to hygiene was, shall we say, a bit different from what we consider the norm today. Over the next few chapters, we'll be exploring the intriguing world of Victorian hygiene. From their bathing rituals, or lack thereof, to their curious remedies for common ailments, we'll uncover the surprising and sometimes downright strange hygiene practices of this bygone era. So, buckle up, grab your smelling salts, just kidding, but you might need them, and get ready for a fascinating journey through the weird and wonderful world of Victorian hygiene. Let's address the elephant, or rather, the unbathed gentleman, in the room. In contrast to our modern-day emphasis on daily showers, regular bathing wasn't exactly a cornerstone of Victorian life. Now, this wasn't because they were inherently unhygienic, but rather a combination of factors influenced their bathing habits. For starters, indoor plumbing, as we know it, was a luxury reserved for the wealthy. Most Victorian homes relied on fireplaces for heating water, which was a time-consuming and labor-intensive process. Imagine having to haul buckets of water from a well or pump, heat them over an open fire, and then fill a tub, all for a single bath. This lack of convenient access to hot water meant that full baths were often a weekly or even monthly affair reserved for special occasions or when absolutely necessary. Instead of full baths, people relied on sponge baths, using basins of water and cloths to cleanse themselves. While this might seem unfathomable to us today, we have to remember that the Victorians didn't necessarily perceive infrequent bathing as being unclean. In fact, they believed that excessive bathing could strip the skin of its natural oils, leaving it vulnerable to illness. Despite infrequent bathing, Victorians weren't averse to cleanliness. This era saw a growing awareness of hygiene's role in preventing disease. Advances in science and medicine spurred this appreciation. The germ theory of disease gained traction, revolutionizing hygiene. Soap became common, shifting focus to eliminating germs. Soap makers capitalized, marketing soaps for their cleansing properties. Victorians also used borax and ammonia to disinfect homes and laundry. Now let's talk about Victorian fashion, because, as you might imagine, the elaborate clothing of the era presented its own set of hygiene challenges. Corsets, those infamous undergarments designed to cinch the waist and accentuate the female figure, were notorious for restricting movement and even breathing. While corsets might seem like a recipe for discomfort and poor hygiene, women did employ various strategies to manage the challenges they posed. Linen or cotton chemises worn beneath corsets helped to absorb perspiration and protect the skin from chafing. These chemises were laundered frequently, serving as a first line of defense against sweat and dirt. Men weren't exempt from the hygiene hurdles posed by Victorian fashion either. High collars, while undeniably dapper, could quickly become breeding grounds for bacteria, especially in warmer weather. To combat this, detachable collars and cuffs, which could be easily removed and laundered, gained popularity. These fashion adaptations highlight the ways in which Victorians attempted to reconcile their desire for elegance with the practicalities of hygiene. However, it's worth noting that these measures weren't always foolproof, and the elaborate clothing of the era undoubtedly contributed to certain hygiene challenges. Let's talk about the Great Stink of London in 1858. Imagine a sweltering London summer, but the air is thick with the stench of sewage. London's sewage system was inadequate for its growing population. Waste flowed into the Thames, turning it into a toxic cesspool. The summer heat intensified the stench, making life unbearable. Contaminated water led to cholera outbreaks, claiming thousands of lives. The government built a modern sewage system, improving public health. Now, while we're on the topic of sanitation, let's talk about toilet paper, or rather the lack thereof. Toilet paper was a new invention and not widely available or affordable for the average person. So, what did people use before commercially produced toilet paper? They got creative. One common alternative was the communal sponge stick. This practice was far from hygienic and likely spread germs. Others used old newspapers, rags, corn cobs, and even seashells. Next time you reach for a plush roll, appreciate how far we've come in sanitation and hygiene. Okay, so we've talked about the Victorians' somewhat questionable bathing habits and their love-hate relationship with chamber pots. But buckle up, me hearties, because we're about to dive into the truly bizarre. Did you know that arsenic, yes, the poison, was a common ingredient in Victorian beauty products? I know, right? It sounds insane. But in the pursuit of a pale complexion, considered the height of beauty at the time, Victorian ladies and gents would ingest small doses of arsenic or apply arsenic-laced powders and creams to their skin. The logic, or lack thereof, was that arsenic could lighten the skin, giving it a translucent, almost ethereal glow. Of course, we now know that arsenic is incredibly toxic and can lead to a whole host of health problems, including skin cancer, liver damage, and even death. So, while that porcelain complexion might have seemed appealing at the time, it came at a hefty price. But hey, at least they smelled faintly of almonds, which, fun fact, is the scent arsenic releases when it's, killing you. Now, we've all heard the phrase mad as a hatter, right? Hat makers used mercury in the process of turning animal fur into felt hats. Prolonged exposure led to erethism, causing tremors, mood swings, and insanity. Mercury was also used in medicines touted as cures, but causing more harm, even in teething powders for babies, causing severe neurological damage. But let's move on, shall we? So, you might think that leeches, those blood-sucking little creatures, were a medical relic of the medieval period. But you'd be wrong. The Victorians, in all their wisdom, decided that leeches were just the ticket for balancing the body's humours, which, if you'll recall, were believed to be the key to good health. Got a fever? Apply some leeches. Suffering from a headache? Leeches to the temples. Feeling a bit melancholic? You guessed it, leeches. The Victorians were nothing if not consistent in their belief that bloodletting was the answer to all of life's ailments. Of course, we now know that draining someone's blood is generally frowned upon in modern medicine, unless you're donating blood, in which case please do. But back then, leeching was all the rage. Doctors would apply these little vampires to their patients, allowing them to gorge themselves on blood until they were plump and satisfied. And if you couldn't afford a real doctor, well, there were always DIY leech kits you could purchase. Because nothing says I'm taking control of my health like intentionally attaching a blood-sucking worm to your body. Okay, so imagine waking up in Victorian England. No, not in some grand manor house with servants attending to your every need. We're talking about the average person here. You know, the people who make up like 97% of the population? Yeah, those guys. First of all, forget your smartphone alarm. You're waking up to the rooster's crow, or maybe just the cold, hard reality that you had to work if you wanted to eat. And work wasn't some cushy 9 to 5 with ergonomic chairs and unlimited coffee. We're talking manual labor, often starting before the sun was even fully up. For men, this might mean heading off to factories, fields, or mines, depending on their trade. Women, especially those in working-class families, often faced similarly grueling work, either inside the home or out in the factories and fields alongside the men. And let's not forget the children. Child labor was rampant during this time, and many young kids worked long hours in often dangerous conditions. So, yeah, no leisurely breakfasts and school buses in this version of history. The workday was long, often stretching for 12 hours or more, with only brief breaks for meals. And speaking of meals, don't picture some elaborate, Instagram-worthy spread. For most, it was simple, often monotonous fare that provided sustenance but not much else. Think bread, potatoes, maybe a bit of cheese or meat if you were lucky. Now, amidst all this toil and hardship, there were a few bright spots in the day. For some, a visit to the pub after work provided a much-needed opportunity to socialize, relax, and escape the drudgery of daily life. And of course, there was always tea. Tea was more than just a beverage in Victorian England. It was a ritual, a social lubricant, and a source of comfort. Even the poorest families often found a way to squeeze in a cup or two throughout the day. But let's not romanticize it too much. Life for the average Victorian was tough, characterized by hard work, limited opportunities, and a constant struggle for survival. As the sun began to set, signaling the end of another long workday, people returned home. Home for many was cramped, often overcrowded tenements, lacking in basic amenities like running water and proper sanitation. But even within these humble dwellings, families sought moments of respite and connection. Reading, if you were literate, was a popular pastime, and the Victorians were avid consumers of newspapers, magazines, and novels. Singing, playing cards, and storytelling provided other forms of entertainment, offering a brief escape from the harsh realities of daily life. And for those seeking a bit of fresh air and social interaction, there were always the parks, which offered a rare glimpse of nature amidst the urban sprawl. Life in Victorian England wasn't all doom and gloom, but it certainly wasn't for the faint of heart. It was a time of stark contrasts, where industrial progress existed alongside widespread poverty, and where moments of simple joy could be found amidst the daily grind. All right, let's talk hygiene, or as the Victorians might say, the art of ablution. Now, we've all heard the rumours about the Victorians and their, shall we say, relaxed relationship with bathing. And while it's true that daily showers weren't exactly the norm back then, the reality is a bit more nuanced than that. See, access to running water was far from universal in the 19th century. Indoor plumbing, as we know it today, was a luxury enjoyed by the wealthy few. Most people relied on wells, pumps, or even rivers and streams for their water supply, which meant hauling heavy buckets back and forth, not exactly conducive to frequent bathing. Instead of full-body immersions, people often opted for what we might call sponge baths. This involved using a basin of water, a washcloth, and maybe a bit of soap to cleanse key areas like the face, hands, and underarms. While this might seem a tad unhygienic by today's standards, it's important to remember that the Victorians were working with what they had. They didn't have the luxury of endless hot water or fancy shower gels. A chamber pot's tale. Now, let's talk about another, shall we say, fragrant aspect of Victorian hygiene, the chamber pot. Before the advent of indoor plumbing, the chamber pot was an essential household item, serving as a, well, portable toilet for nighttime use. These porcelain vessels were often kept under the bed or in a nearby commode and, as you can imagine, needed to be emptied regularly. And by regularly, I mean someone, usually a servant if you had them, had to physically carry that thing outside and dispose of its contents. Needless to say, this system wasn't exactly sanitary. Even with regular emptying, chamber pots often emitted unpleasant odors and could attract pests. And if you think that's bad, just imagine the situation during outbreaks of diseases like cholera and typhoid. The lack of proper sanitation was a major public health concern in Victorian England, contributing to the spread of disease and high mortality rates, especially in crowded urban areas. So we've established that access to water and proper sanitation played a significant role in shaping Victorian hygiene practices. But there's another factor we haven't discussed yet: fashion. Victorian fashion, especially for women, was all about layers, corsets, and voluminous skirts. While undeniably stylish, these elaborate ensembles weren't exactly practical when it came to, bathing or using the toilet. Imagine trying to maneuver your way out of a tightly laced corset and multiple petticoats, just to use the chamber pot in the middle of the night. Not exactly a recipe for hygiene, right? The complexities of Victorian fashion, combined with the limitations of sanitation and water access, created a perfect storm for, shall we say, less than ideal hygiene practices. Well, there you have it, a glimpse into the fascinating and sometimes cringe-worthy world of Victorian hygiene. From chamber pots to sponge baths, the Victorians certainly had their own unique ways of dealing with, well, life's necessities. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to FactFolio for more fascinating historical content. See you next time.